covered the front stage of the business model canvas in terms of how we can innovate. What we're going to do now is focus on the back stage. In other words, how we can create a competitive advantage by re-engineering some of the activities, the key resources and key partners. And in terms of the Invisible Company, what they've done is they've focused on each of these and identified what really successful companies do. And we're going to take a much deeper dive as we go through this in terms of activity differentiators, key resources, castles and scalers. Now the key thing is there's a lot to go into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus particularly and give you examples of resource castles. And the reason for that is because resource castles are one of the most important parts of the business model canvas. It's how you protect a business model from your competitors. Now it's not to say the other parts aren't equally important, but it's in terms of companies and how they work, it's quite often important to do that. So let's just take a deeper dive into each of these sections and start to think about what they mean and how we can use them. So resource castles build a competitive advantage with key resources that are difficult or impossible for competitors to copy. And we have an example, which is Waze, which we'll talk about in a minute. Activity differentiators radically change the activities and they deliver a performance better, they do things better and a better performance than competitors. And we're going to have a look at Zara in that as an example. And then scalers, they find new ways to actually scale the business where other companies can't do that. And so we're going to take a look at IKEA and how it managed to do that. So in terms of IKEA, what was the problem in the marketplace before IKEA? Well, one of the big problems was the fact that furniture was already assembled. Now let's think about that. One of the things that affected first and foremost was the fact of actually distributing the product. You can't fit many finished sofas into a lorry. Other problems included the amount of space you then needed in retail. If people ordered a sofa, you normally had a showroom, but you didn't have stock because of the amount of space it took up. It was very expensive. IKEA rethought that and came up with the idea of actually letting customers assemble the products themselves. Of course, they had a showroom, but the key thing was customers were able to actually order the product on the day and take it away with them. So that radically changed the market. And of course, in terms of distribution, they actually packaged it up in boxes. That made the whole distribution easier. So by actually rethinking the product, rethinking how they could appeal in a marketplace, they were able to rapidly scale where others had failed. Then in terms of resource castles, we have Waze. Waze crowdsources information on GPS systems. By using that, it's able to feed back through its application exactly what the traffic is at any one point. That enabled it, that intellectual property and the way it used it was unique to Waze. Another interesting case in terms of activities is Zara. Zara can spot fashion trends in the marketplace and then turn that fashion trend into a finished design and take it to market quicker than any of its competitors. Not only that, it has its own stores. So it can spot trends, produce a fashion item, and then stock it in stores faster than its competitors because of the activities it uses. That each of these cases gives these companies competitive advantages. What we're going to do is take a much deeper dive into resource castles. As I mentioned earlier, resource castles help you protect your business. And it's really important that your business model is difficult to copy. If it's unique and difficult to copy, it makes it harder for competitors. So there are 4 different types of resource castles. First of all, we have this idea of a user-based castles. As we mentioned with Spotify, it was first into the market, gained a huge user base, and then anybody else coming to the market had to play catch up. Another example of a user base is Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson has built up a massive community of enthusiasts, and the community is run by Harley Davidson in itself. It runs events, and it mines the data and information, and it uses that to be able to really develop a tight relationship with its customers. That gives it a value proposition that can be protected. And of course, in each of these cases, whatever you do as a resource has a resource cost to it. Then we've got platform castles. Platforms use network effects. Now, network effects sounds complicated, but it's quite easy. So if you take eBay, for instance, if you had only a few people selling goods on eBay, it wouldn't be very appealing to those people that want to buy goods. So what eBay has to do is populate one side of the market, the people that want to sell goods, in proportion to the number of people that want to buy goods. And as more people want to actually sell goods on the market, it becomes more appealing because of the range of products that they'll list, becomes more appealing for those that want to buy goods. Equally, reverse it round, and you have this idea that the more sellers, the more buyers come onto the market, the more volume each seller can sell, or they can sell a bigger range, and that makes it more appealing for people that want to sell. So platform castles work on this idea of network effects. Then we have intellectual property castles. These develop unique products or services that they then protect. Quite often it's not just products though, it can actually be components, for instance chips that are used within iPhones or computers. Often these are protected. Now the way that they make money is not only some companies use them themselves, but they license the intellectual property to other companies. And of course you've got brand castles. Building up a brand like Apple takes huge amounts of money and investment to become globally recognized. And over time, it's hard for other companies to come in who want to compete and get that level of brand recognition without spending huge amounts of money. So brands themselves can be a key aspect. And one of the questions that we're seeking to answer here is how could we make something difficult to copy? What's a resource that we could use that others can't get access to or protect? In terms of user-based castles, let's take a much deeper look into this. So if you've got a user base, one of the key things you're focused on is user acquisition, because inevitably you will have churn within that. The second part is that then in terms of your cost structure, there will be quite a considerable cost associated with that, because you'll have to do a lot of marketing, you'll have to do a lot of sales to get user acquisition. But your value proposition gets better with more users. Platform castles, as I mentioned earlier with the example of eBay, tend to work on this idea of network effects. So as you populate one side of the market platform, it becomes more appealing to the other side. So in terms of your customer segments, you have to focus equally in terms of gaining two sets of users. And a good example here is Didi, which is a ride-hailing service. Similar to Uber, the problem is if you didn't have many drivers in a city, it wouldn't be appealing for those that wanted a ride. So you have to get enough drivers for there to be a platform that's viable for people that want to gain a ride. And again, your whole strategy then develops and business model develops on the idea of developing platform operations and as an activity, but also then being able to populate both sides of the platform. And your value proposition really does depend on offering those two, building up those two user bases. Intellectual property castles, as I mentioned, quite often are based on R&D efforts. So in other words, If we take Dyson, for instance, Dyson's got a huge amount of patents. In fact, if you go online and do some research, you can see that large companies like Microsoft, Samsung, and many, many others regularly file huge amounts of patents, often thousands in a year. And what they're looking to do is continually look into the future as to what new products or services could or they might develop that they can have and protect. And it becomes a key strategic advantage because others can't use that without the license, or maybe not at all. They can't simply copy it. And a good example here is Dyson. Dyson put a lot of research and effort into building out different products that had a unique designs, unique aspect that they could patent. That meant that the products they were able to sell had a premium price. So you've got Dyson hair dryers, for instance, and they are well above the average price. So the question here is, how could we use protected intellectual property as a competitive advantage? Where hasn't it been used before? So in other words, if you've got a material, for instance, that you've developed and you use it, say, for an air-wing plane, could that material that you have a patent for be used in other industries? That's just one example. Brand councils, as I mentioned, these are where you've got what's called a love mark brand. In other words, it's well recognised, well loved, and as I said, Apple's a good example. And the key brand value proposition revolves around the brand. Although we talk about iPhones, Apple is unbelievably recognisable everywhere. And we want that brand to be a central part of how we develop relationships. That means the customer experience or the customer relationship becomes a key aspect of your business model, because a brand can be easily damaged if you don't have good customer support, if you don't maintain a good relationship with your customers. So for each customer segment, you need to ensure that you follow through with that in terms of delivering a good customer experience. But the benefits are that you can charge a premium price. As we all know, Apple charges premium prices relative to other manufacturers. In terms of activities then, marketing and branding become a key aspect. That means the central point of activities that we want to focus on if we're going to be a brand are how we market our brand, position it in the marketplace, and ensure that we deliver that. So marketing and brand costs become a key part of the business model. So although we're talking about a resource, we can start to see how that strategy, that focus changes other parts of the business model. And that's why they're called patterns.